Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live feed. We are coming to you from the UWI Open Campus at Marisho House on H.A. Blaze Street. Now, this afternoon, we are gathered here. It is the second in a series of discussions, if you will, on abuse. And abuse, we would like to define as both sexual, emotional, and physical. The first was brought to you in October 2019, and it was, let's say, started by someone who is very aware and wanted to bring into focus the discussions and bring to light issues of abuse in Grenada. And that person is ethicistician and beautician and cosmetologist Rosemarie Charles. So we are coming to you live. Of course, Rosemarie Charles being the lead on this, and this is being brought to you by Rosemarie's Cosmetics. That is her skin care company. And so we're discussing abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, and the impact of COVID-19 in the second of the series. I am Brenda Batiste, and I'm your moderator for this afternoon. And we welcome those of you joining us on the Government Information Service, the GIS, TNR Communications, Partygrenada, on the Rosemarie Charles Cosmetics Facebook page, and wherever you are joining us this afternoon. Those of you in the diaspora, good afternoon to you as well. Now, sexual and gender-based violence does not begin with disasters like COVID-19, but the chaos and instability they cause leave women and girls more vulnerable. There is already a concern that COVID-19 is leading to an increase of sexual and gender-based violence. That's rising levels of violence, I should say. Now, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has sounded an alarm on a horrifying global surge of domestic violence. The COVID-19 pandemic is a disaster that has severely disrupted the normal functioning of populations around the world and continues to proliferate indiscriminately. Disease outbreaks like COVID-19 threaten the health of all, but women, girls, and boys are disproportionately affected. And during epidemics, the very measures taken to protect populations and to keep health systems afloat leave women and girls especially vulnerable to violence. Now, sexual and gender-based violence is a hidden consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, as communities around the world, Grenada included, are forced to stay at home. Women and girls are at a heightened risk of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, child abuse, and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence. Because disasters exacerbate pre-existing gender inequities and power hierarchies, violence in the home may worsen as prolonged quarantine and economic stressors increase tension in the household. Women and girls are isolated from the people and resources that can help them, and they have few opportunities to distance themselves from their abusers. So we're going to bring that into focus in our community. We're also going to get some information on the global outlook. And we have a great panel here with us this evening. You're not seeing them because of the physical structure of the room. Of course, we are observing all the COVID-19 protocols. They are in place here. But of course, everyone will come to the mic and make their presentations. We trust you can stay with us. But before we delve into the meat of the matter, we first must invoke the presence of the Almighty. And it's a pleasure to introduce to the mic Reverend Vonnie James for the invocation.
Good evening, and thank you, Ms. Moderator. We pray. We pray in the name of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Indeed, God, we thank you for this day. This is the day that you have made. We come here in this day and this time to continue to advocate for, to continue to fight on behalf of those who are abused, those who are vulnerable and taken advantage of, and God, those who, because of their own situations, are forced to compromise in their own sexuality and other aspects of their life. And so as we come, we lift this symposium before you. We thank you for the work of Rosemarie and all the team persons who are here. We thank you, Lord, for our moderator, our presenters. We thank you for the Ministry of Social Development and the work that is happening there, our media personnel, and all those who listening and looking at this live feed. We pray, God, that even as we engage, lives will be affected, oppressed will be released, and people who may be oppressed in terms of sexually or otherwise may get a chance to tell the stories and cause liberation throughout Grenada, Carriacou, Pidi-Martinique, and especially the diaspora. We thank you, Lord, for this day. Bless this event now. In Christ's name we pray. Amen and amen.
Thank you so much, Reverend Vonnie James. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first presenter. Of course, she is an educator, a very qualified one at that. She heads one of Grenada's finest institution. It is really a Grenadian institution in the big parish of Labby, St. Andrew. She is also very involved in community work, and she's married to a scholar. Please welcome the principal of the St. Andrew's Anglican Secondary School, Mrs. Diana Abel Jeffrey.
A pleasant afternoon to the physical audience and to the virtual audience also. I am speaking from an educator's perspective and as an educational leader. And we are focusing on abuse, the different forms of abuse in the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, most of it, prior to now, school was sort of off. So not a lot could be said about what happens at the school in terms of abuse. But however, I want to focus a bit still on abuse as it relates to students. So I will be speaking about abuse as it relates to students in the COVID-19 pandemic. I will also speak about the duty of school leaders in dealing with abuse, and I will also seek to give some advice. So to begin, as I said, school was not in its normal form during the earlier part of the pandemic. So I cannot say that we had occurrences of reports at the school. But we are quite aware that many of our students are in homes where abuse has been taking place. We are quite aware that many of our students experience the different forms of abuse. That's the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, and the emotional abuse. We even have students and children who are neglected. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have had instances where reports have been made to us of students in situations that we would say that are not very satisfying, not very comfortable, situations where some students have to be taken out of the situation out of the home that they have been in because they are being abused by persons who are close to them. And this has been occurring for a very long time, as the moderator has said at the very beginning, that it did not start with COVID-19, but it continued. And we must pay particular attention to that. And though I am focusing on the students, we know that it's not only children that are being abused, because we have a lot of adults that are being abused. But as a school leader, I chose to focus especially on the students. So, as we are back in school, we have a duty to look for the signs, because the signs are always there. So we have to look for things like marks on the student's skin. We have to look for things like changes in behavior. We have to look for things like absences, unexplained absences. We have to look for unexplained reasons for things that may seem strange to us. So as a school leader, I encourage my teachers to take a closer look at the students when they come before us, because we know that this is real. Abuse is real. And many times, the students are afraid. They are afraid to speak out. So when they do not speak out, we have to look out. So we have to look for the signs. In some instances, the students will confide in some of the teachers and even in the school leaders. And we have a duty to report. There is mandatory reporting. So we must report. And we have to, as educators, educate the children and even the parents to let them know that it is our duty to report. We also have to go further to let students know that it is okay to speak out. The victims of abuse, they are afraid, but we have to get them to that point where they are no longer afraid and they will be comfortable to speak out so that they can get the appropriate help. Because the help is actually there. We know that things have improved. There have been changes in the laws and abuses. The victims of abuse can now rely or feel more comfortable going to the law to get some form of justice. And I just want to, before I close, just encourage children, parents, and even those who are not parents, community leaders, community persons, to look out for the incidents of abuse, report when you need to report, and assist in whatever way you can. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Our first presenter, the principal of the St. Andrew's Anglican Secondary School, SAS, Mrs. Diane Abel Jeffrey. And indeed, as she used the term look out, indeed it might be a case of looking out as the students have been away from the physical school family for so long that now is almost like a reacquainting. So the looking out by the teachers and the counselors and neighbors and people that are close are very, very important if we ought to help them through, if they had any sort of situation that we need to help them through. So indeed. So we started at school, which is a very good place to start because we are heading back to school. And we're going to keep it in that vein because we will now hear from the Child Protection Authority as to, and I'm sure there might be some semblance of information we may gather as to just where things are at and where we're going in terms of taking care and looking out for children where abuse may have occurred. Before I move on, I must send warm commendations, and we must say that we are missing a member, a very critical member of this team, Dr. Augustine Panchu. Of course, he had to leave us at very short notice, but very important. And we send our prayers and well wishes to you and your family. He is a clinical psychologist attached to the Ministry of Social Development. And unfortunately, he can't be with us this evening physically, but I know that he is here in spirit, and I'm sure peeping on from somewhere. So it is a great pleasure to introduce our next presenter. She is Miss Janelle Grant Hamlet, and she is the Public Relations Officer with the Child Protection Authority.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good afternoon to everyone. It is truly my pleasure to represent the Child Protection Authority at this Abuse and Impact of COVID-19 Symposium. How many of us remember the thrill we felt at the close of 2019? That anticipation of something new and exciting, new goals, new plans, aspirations? Well, fast forward to 9 months, and much of that excitement, I'm sure, has been replaced by fear and uncertainty as our world as we know it has been thrown into chaos because of the unwelcome novel coronavirus. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected and continues to affect everyone, children included. Babies, toddlers, adolescents, teens. Even though they are among a small percentage of people actually contracting the virus worldwide, they are by no means excluded from the sideline effects. The lockdowns, isolation, fear of contracting the virus, the socioeconomic impact of their parents losing their jobs, the list goes on. And on top of that, many still have to deal with ongoing abuse. One would think that a health threat of this magnitude would cause people to realize the value of life and further motivate them to protect the ones they love. But sadly, this is not the case for all children. The 214 reports reaching the Child Protection Authority between the months of March to August 2020 shows that the monster of abuse is still roaming free despite this pandemic. Some of the categories include sexual abuse, physical abuse, parenting difficulties, neglect and abandonment, domestic violence, and family dysfunction. These and other types of abuse and maltreatment have both long and short-term effects on the children. Among them are physical health problems, mental health problems, behavioral issues, attachment issues, anxiety, low self-esteem. And children should never have to experience this, especially in these times. That's why, though challenging through it all, the Child Protection Authority stayed the course by delivering its services and making its interventions, as we understand that children are more susceptible to abuse, especially in times of crisis. Throughout this period, our various units have been making use of mechanisms available to respond to incoming reports. Our line has been open throughout the entire lockdown period to receive calls. Our 24-hour duty system continued operating, and child protection officers have been making their necessary interventions. Our psychological assessment and treatment team has been making regular contact with clients to facilitate activities, provide support to parents and guardians, helping to schedule activities for children while at home, and are providing psychological support to children at various residential care homes and the families. Our family support unit is also working with families in our database, providing them with the moral support necessary via telephone calls and visits, and facilitating linkages between them and the social services they require. And in terms of communication, during the lockdown period, we have been making information relative to COVID-19 and the protection of children available to the public via social media. But most recently, we have launched our COVID-19 campaign, focusing on the dissemination of positive parenting and safeguarding tips, because for us at the Child Protection Authority, prevention is truly better than cure. Through this campaign, we hope to provide families with information that would help them to be better able to deal with the challenges arising from this pandemic. We are hoping that parents, guardians, carers will be more responsible in their actions and more aware of their duties when it comes to protecting the physical, emotional, and psychological well-being of their children. We also hope that children themselves would find the information we share useful as they become empowered to speak up and speak out about abuse. So all in all, what has the experience for the Child Protection Authority been? We continue to carry out our mandates and provide our services to our clients and their families. We know that these are challenging and uncertain times, but we implore all our stakeholders, all those viewing this program here today, everyone who has a family, who has a child that they care about, to play their parts in protecting all the children in the state of Grenada, to ensure that our children are in the best place mentally, emotionally, and physically, not only to survive, but to thrive during this COVID-19 experience. I thank you.
Thank you very much to Mrs. Janelle Grant Hamlet, the Public Relations Officer of the Child Protection Authority, the CPA. I must extend commendations to the Child Protection Authority. This morning while driving, I heard the radio drama series that you have collaborated with Lebo Khan, and commendations on that. That is a very good way to get the message across, because we are very oral people. It works instead of just handing out pamphlets and all of that. So I trust you have the funding that we can have more of it, and we can see something on television and as well as radio. So congratulations on that. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a new addition, a new and vibrant addition to the RGPF. And that is the Special Victims Unit. And this afternoon, it is an ultimate pleasure to invite Detective Anika Charles to be our next presenter and to hear from the Special Victims Unit on all the work they have been doing on abuse in Grenada. Detective Charles.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good evening, everyone. And before I start, permit me to extend commendations to the organizers of such excellent initiative. My presentation will focus on police response to incidents of gender-based violence throughout the pandemic. Abuse on our vulnerable population, example, women, children, and even our men, as well continues to be a major concern for the Special Victims Unit and the RGPF on a whole. This pandemic period has been a rude awakening for many of us as we face new realities in these unprecedented times. making us more cognizant of our human nature, resulting in a greater appreciation and understanding of the fragility of human life. Coupled with the loss of jobs, the frustration and uncertainty of what lie ahead in these covidious times, this pandemic has also brought to the fore the raft of issues that exist among families, and in particular has exacerbated the vulnerability of many of our women and children who have had to be hunkered down with the abusers during the lockdown period. It is plausible for one to conclude, and as supported by evidence-based research, that in times of crisis, there is usually an escalation in sexual and domestic violence incidents. Permit me to enlighten you on the statistical data of the RGPF. I will give a brief comparative analysis for the past 3 years. Sexual offenses, and this deals with persons affected, victims. In 2018, from January to December, we had 294 victims. 2019, from January to December, we had 179 victims, and this year, 2020, from January to July, we had 80 victims. In comparison of 2020, January to July, to 2019, January to July, we were seeing a 38% contraction. Domestic violence in 2018, we had 1,070. 2019, 1,304. And in 2020, from January to June, we had 557 reports being made to the RGPF. While the statistical data reflects a significant decline, this may not be very true. This may not be a very true reflection of the incidents that actually occurred, some of which may include why. There are various reasons why victims might not have reported incidents. For one, we have fear of the perpetrator or the abuser, uncertainties as to whether the support entities were operating, and fear of not being able to get help and then having to return to the perpetrator, and this may as well put them in a worse situation. Over 30 interim protection orders were applied on behalf of survivors during the period April to August 2020, the most in any given period. Overwhelmingly, the data continues to reveal that our area of greatest concentration is young females between the ages of 13 and 16 years, and with incidents of indecent assault. So what strategies were employed by the Special Victims Unit during this period to address these concerns? One, the office operated and continues to operate daily to address the needs of walk-in customers, and the 400 hotline continues to be available daily for 24 hours. Two, we're having an understanding of our society and the impact of sexual and domestic violence on individuals. We visited many homes during the lockdown to provide support for survivors and to take them to get help. Continue to utilize the various police stations throughout the districts to respond to and address abuse reports, which was treated with a measure of urgency. Many persons called via the telephone and requested counseling. They were provided guidance as per the law and were referred to the psychosocial units of the Ministry of Social Development for further intervention. The unit also worked in tandem with our police prosecutors and the magistrates to hear urgent matters and to grant protection orders. We also worked closely with the Ministry of Social Development to move women as well as children to safe houses. We had officers from the Special Victims Unit assigned also to various districts at times. Activities like what we're experiencing here this evening motivate us and bring us about job satisfaction, knowing that our message can reach individuals and change the trajectory of many lives from being victims or continuing victims of abuse. Events like these can also transform the mind of at least one would-be perpetrator who might be thinking of preying on some vulnerable child. Today, we stand resolute in our commitment to eradicating the scourge of sexual and domestic violence among our women, children, and men. This we will achieve by continuing to advocate for victims and those at risk through public education and action which focus on bringing about positive behavioral changes. The Special Victims Unit and the RGPF sincerely appreciate and commend Honorable Delma Thomas, our Minister of Social Development, and her ministry for unwavering commitment to this cause. Permit me also to recognize our Commissioner of Police and his senior administration for their unstinted support to the SVU, the Special Victims Unit, as we forge ahead and stand resolute and committed to enforcing the law to its fullest extent so that every perpetrator can be brought to justice. Today, I encourage everyone in hearing of the sound of my voice, join us and speak out against gender-based violence, speak out against child abuse, and make a clarion call to one and all to get on board and play your part in this fight against child abuse. Child abuse is indeed an epidemic, and we all have the power to stop it. Speak out and be a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. Let us do all in our power to ensure that our children, women, and men are safe from sexual abuse and harm. Let us protect our future. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Detective Anika Charles from the Special Victims Unit. Let's give her another round of applause. So very well done. Remember the first time I saw her, she was so shy. Can't tell, right? It's development. So congratulations to the RGPF for, of course, all the training and the work done to develop the young woman detective. The spikes reported from April to August just kind of jolted me a little bit. And so just taking the emotion away from it, it really, really brings to bear what we're discussing here, the fact that COVID-19, the period of lockdown, I mean, in my opening, in the preamble, I did say that abuse started long before COVID. But here we are, listening to the science of the numbers informing us that in the period we were locked down, so that is April through August, the spikes that we had. And that is concerning, and it means this is so timely, and it means that we all have a lot of work to do. It's not the police, it's not the CPA alone, it's not the Ministry of Social Development alone. Collectively, we all have a lot of work to do. Thank you so much again, Special Victims Unit, for that detail, and may your work be strengthened by the strength of the community in enabling you to continue to function. Our next presenter, we welcome a part of this that we don't often hear, our Probation Unit, and the head of unit, Mrs. Judy Milo. She'll now come to present for us. Let's welcome her.
Good afternoon to everyone. As the clock struck 12 on the 31st of December 2019, we celebrated the new year, and most of us anticipated a good year, a different year, a year of new beginning. No one anticipated that instead of the possible fulfillment of our dreams, that we will have to make adjustments to a new normal. This is because of COVID-19. We still try to understand the many changes, the inability to hug each other now, the trauma and fear of witnessing someone sneezing and not knowing whether the person has the virus, the wearing of masks, which has also almost caused most of us demise. As we puff for breads and our hearts race. I remember the other day I was coming from the court and rushing to the next court because it was the wrong court. And the officer said, Miss Milo, take off your mask, you can't breathe. And then I realized I was so breathless. So this is what our challenges are. In an effort to get a true picture of what persons in Grenada experienced during that period of the lockdown, I thought the best approach was to interview individuals randomly and do case studies. This is my finding. During the COVID lockdown, it did reveal some hidden secrets within the family. For some persons, the lockdown was a challenge. Some persons found that their mates were unfaithful and felt helpless living in the house with the persons. COVID exposed everything. Some couples, because they were not confined to their homes, realized that there were no means of escape. And that is because prior, they knew their mates were being unfaithful, they had things in the home happening, but they used work and social activities as a means of taking a breather and a breath to come back. But now you just have to go head on and come face to face with the reality of what's happening. This resulted in them being stressed and feeling hopeless. Relationships which were already strained became painful to endure. I heard so many horror stories about things that happened during that period. Some who already knew look on in horror, as in a few cases, some persons told me that despite the curfew restriction, they witnessed their husband trying to sneak through the back to go to the keeper, the person they were having an affair with. At times, confronting some of these challenges, some persons were verbally abused, emotionally and physically abused. It was also disclosed that people used their allotted shopping time to de-stress. That's why we heard over and over they were asking us, only go for your essentials. And some persons told me, even if I had to get 2 things just to take a walk from the lockdown, I use it as a means of going. This involved going to the supermarket even just to buy a few things. At that time, some persons used it as an opportunity to go to visit a friend or 2. The majority of persons complained that the most difficulty they experienced was psychologically. Until this day, it continues to be a challenge. Some persons candidly told me that they thought about committing suicide. They knew how it felt to be incarcerated now. And the other part for the suicide ideations were because they did not know what was happening and what will happen in the future. People still try to understand, what is this virus? Some persons tell you. Some persons say, in the quest not to come head on, they just say, nothing will happen. It's not in Grenada. We won't get it, because that's how they know how to deal with it. Some people suffer from anxiety to this day and still find it hard to sleep. Some victims some females who are victims of abuse look on in fear and horror as the moods of the partner change, as the food in the house lessen, and the partner become restless. Some persons say they felt like they were prisoners in their own home. The sale of alcohol increased verbal and physical abuse. So when Mr. Prime Minister stopped the sale, it was to the comfort of a lot of women. But when they began to sell again, some women became victims of abuse again. Sexual abuse. A mother knew her husband, who is the sole provider, was abusing her daughter at that time, their daughter. But because he's the only provider, she did not bother. A mother knew her husband, who is a church member, and they are good persons in the church, abusing their daughter sexually. She does nothing. Why? Because she doesn't want to tarnish the image in the church. Hopelessness, despite how it presently looks. That's how some people feel to this day, and still has to deal with the whole changes because of our new normal, and still has to deal with the abuse and smile and pretend like nothing is happening. Neighbors know, but because a child is a hot child, according to our definition in society, we do nothing. When in truth and in fact, This hot child must have been abused somewhere along the line to get her to be so hot and to have a lot of feelings of for sex. One girl I was speaking to today, and she said, Miss Milo, when my mother used to go with men, she used to bring me. And I used to sit in the vehicle, or I sit outside, and the men would say, want us to try some big things? And I used to ignore them. So this is a society, in as much as we want to think and believe that we're such a nice nation and nothing is happening, that our people are psychologically suffering in pain, uncertainty, a sense of hopelessness and fear. Some persons hope that there will never be a lockdown again because of the pain that they have to endure. The Ministry of Social Development and our Honorable Minister, Delma Thomas, we are committed to the eradication of abuse. In conclusion, I would like to say, from all indication, the lockdown during COVID-19 was a challenge. And to this day, particularly psychologically, it is a challenge. It would be remiss of me not to remind persons that the Lord encourages us in His word. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct thy path. Speak out and speak up. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for these revealing truth serums. Yeah, I know it's normally very hard for us to take in that kind of difficult information, but that's the kind of information that we need, and probably because it hits us in an emotional place, it would spiral us into some compassionate action. And so thank you very much for that, your presentation, Head of Probation Unit, Mrs. Judy Milo. And of course, because you are so conversant, and so I'm sure it's a lot you carry in your head. And I hope you get your de-stressor, whatever that is, because you need it for all these things that you're hearing. Just on a side, or just to further bolster what you're saying about what couples are experiencing, because remember here we're talking about sex abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, of course, intimate partner, child sexual abuse, and all of that. I was looking at the Chinese network. Was it Leroy? You know it well. What's the name of it? But anyway, the one on cable I was looking on, and they were talking about the divorce rate in China for the first time. They really took a look and realized it was so high from the period April through August. And so being the very science-driven society they are, they embarked on some exit, like just to get from the people, some surveys, so to speak, from the divorcees. And men in particular, because apparently men were more open during the process than women, and men in particular say while they were locked down with their partners, one man said, I realized I don't even like her. And they had been married for 20 years. He looked into the camera and he said, I realized I did not even like her. And I found that out when we were locked down in China. They were locked down from December through about May. So yeah, he said, I realized I didn't even like her. I didn't want to be there anymore. And so it is a struggle for us human beings all over the world. And the Grenadian problem is the everywhere problem. But we're small enough, we love each other enough to be able to try to fix our problems and to try to change the trajectory and cycle, so to speak, because a lot of it is cultural and social and maybe historical too. So, right, Ms. McQueen? Yes. So that is what we aim to try to just change the trajectory, so to speak, with these sort of presentations. So we continue: abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, and the impact of COVID-19. And after that heavy hit from Miss Milo, we would invite Reverend Vonnie James to give us the spirit perspective, so to speak. I know too he likes delving in data and science. So although he's a reverend, it may not be what you expect, but just have an open mind and trust everyone is, really open and getting some information and spiraling you into thinking differently and trying to change. So please welcome Reverend Vonnie James, our next presenter.
Good evening again, and thank you, Madam Moderator. Again, we continue on the process where we're at. As we do so, we want to recognize our senator with us, Senator Judd Cadet, and it's important for people like him and others to be part of this conversation. This evening, even as we continue, I will speak to the issue of emotional, sexual, and spiritual abuse a bit in the context of the COVID-19 realities. Let me say again, it is an honor to be here and to really be part of this symposium. When I speak from the perspective of a Christian public theologian, and this person's engaged theologically issues that sometimes the church may or may have issues discussing within its own borders. I wish to also thank the president of the Grenada Association of Wellness Professionals, Ms. Rosemarie Charles, for inviting me to be part of this, and to also acknowledge that we do miss Dr. Augustine Pancho, who I was looking forward to seeing today. And we must give a special thanks to the Ministry of Social Development for supporting this process through its departments and unit. But my task today is to give a synopsis of my own experience in the theme for discussion, emotional, sexual, and spiritual abuse in the light of COVID-19 realities. Now, a couple weeks ago, maybe about 3 weeks ago, I was in reflection and thought that if I were to write a book of the last 10 years, for spite, I will leave 2020 blank, for spite. And after reflection, because of the number of issues that 2020 has brought to us, but after more reflection, I realized that what we are seeing in 2020 are really issues that has been rooted and culturalized in many of our societies, and particularly the issue of abuse. So the challenges that we are facing now, they are not new. They are just rising up for this time. But as the presenter said, I'd like to begin with data. An August 18, 2020 report from the Congressional Report Service of the United States indicated that Caribbean nations that depends on tourism face a deep economic recession, which projected annual GDP decline between 5 to 10%. So basically the report said that there'll be a 5 to 10% decrease in the amount of in our GDP, which is gross domestic product. The decline in economic growth in 2020 is expected to create income inequalities and poverty throughout the region. And as we think about that, we also need to remember that if this reality is so, The coronavirus is creating and storing and causing a number of issues, particularly in the area of abuse. So the reality of Latin America and the Caribbean then is that our economy are looking tighter and things are not looking good, as the economists will say. Now, think about that context and place that in the Grenadian context. And it simply means that the reality facing us is that such a climate creates all kinds of situation for abuse, all kinds of situation for abuse. One form of emotional abuse that the Grenadian people have shared with me is what I call the insensitivity. It's just a term I created. Insensitivity to the dignity of the vulnerable. And what does that mean? That is, in some quarters, during this pandemic time, service to the vulnerable seems to be not an honorable undertaking, but it's more like a border. And so clients are left feeling embarrassed, ashamed, isolated, insulted, and in some ways with fear. The result of this fear then is leading to a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness in spite of this COVID reality. Now, the real spin-off from that is the issue of sexual abuse and what I call rape. Whereas in the pre-COVID time, the issue of transactional sex involves usually, not always, but usually, adults and adults trading goods for service, so to speak. In this case, there are people in positions of authority in various spheres who are in the position of power. They are literally forcing, it's supposed to be an exchange, but they're literally forcing particularly women and young girls to give sex in order for them to get some of those services that are provided. And that in itself is serious within the context of COVID-19. Now, when you look at that reality, and you look at the reality of transactional sex before, what you do find now is that the victims have less bargaining power because resources are scarce economically. And so I call it because even though a victim gives permission for sex, usually female, that victim only give because, force. They are not given what we call proper consent. But a third issue of that has slowly crept in, unfortunately I think Grenada has nipped it in the bud, is what I call spiritual abuse, where we saw some people being ridiculed, Christian, faith people being ridiculed because they choose to stay at home to keep in line with COVID protocol, but others thought they were faithless, put them on a guilt trip, and ridicule the whole affairs. Fortunately for us in Grenada, it is my perception and belief that the strong leadership of the Conference of Churches, the strong leadership of the Alliance of Churches during that time, mixed with patriotism and the bad realities of what happened in the United States, where even pastors died when they choose to go against the COVID-19 protocols and congregations get infected, will have caused many Grenadians to sober up on the reality that COVID is here. So that spiritual abuse began, but it slowly died as it did not take any shape. Now, from a theological perspective, abuse is sin. We consider abuse as sin. Abuse is sin because it disregards the value of the individual created in the image of God. And while these abuse happens, they separate people from their own person, from I like to call we separate the human person from the human being. And one individual become two different things with the effect of this abuse. And so when you look all through it, you realize that whatever name we want to frame it, however we want to class it as, whether from a sociological perspective or theological perspective, abuse is just messy and it's just never good in any whichever way. There's just no good thing that come out of abuse. On the positive, the World Health Organization recognizes and affirms that religious leaders and faith-based organizations can play a major role in saving lives and reducing illness caused by COVID-19. But also, religious leaders can play a major role in advocating for and helping to alleviate the issue of abuse that is right among us. And I'd like to give 3 thoughts concerning that. I think one of the first way forward in addressing that is what I like to call change the narrative. Is a thought I use a lot. Change the narrative. I believe that if we address abuse in the context of social justice, rather than just limiting it to whether it is emotional, sexual, or spiritual, then it brings to bear a broader framework. And we use this framework and challenge what is brought before us, and then put this framework within a social work concept, and realizing that through the pillars of social work, we focus on human dignity, community, solidarity, rights and responsibilities, and priority for the poor, priority for the vulnerable, and peace. If we frame abuse within that space, social justice, then I think we'll be able to move further than where we are. The other thing is to expose it. I mean, I heard the presenter from the department spoke about the fact that someone was being abused in a church space. And for too long, we've been hiding those things. And all have sinned, we like to say. But whenever we realize we have sinned, we need to change from those sins. So both the Catholic Church, the largest religious body in the world, and the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant religious group in the world, are putting spotlights on sexual abuse particularly, and in exposing those areas and creating space for people to speak and engage. So we change the narrative, we expose. But also, we use theological arguments, we use critical thinking to engage and fight this abuse. You see, for too long, we've recognized that we pass an abused person, a victim, as just George child or Mary child or just whoever. But sometimes we forget that an abuse victim is a human being. Very, very important. A human being. A human being. And this person has the right to life, has the right to good living. And the bigger thing is that this person was created in the image of God. And one of the things that get me frightened is to affront the image of God. And when we affront, when we abuse people, we affront the image of God. And so as I close then, I want to call on us as a church community, as a faith community, as a Grenadian community, to look to see in areas where we have turned a blind eye. I am unpopular for being frank. I just cannot mix matters, right? To look to see where we have turned our blind eyes, and to call out abuse wherever they are. And as we do that, we find solutions, both for the victims and perpetrators, to help our Grenadian community become that transformative environment where all of us, regardless of our race, our color, our sex, our sexual likings and agendas, can move together and grow this country forward. If we're going to do that, it must include restorative justice. And I ask that as we continue along that path of seeking to eradicate, let us bring in restorative justice to be a major part of what we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Reverend Vonnie James. And indeed, I like where you ended with restorative justice, because we pay a lot of attention to the afflicted, the victim, and then it's consequential and punishment for the perpetrator. But in terms of restoring, we fall down on that, because that is a complete cycle in terms of healing and how we prevent the abuse from, keep happening and happening and happening. And of course, talking about restorative justice, it is something probably we could say for the future, or for the now, or for today. And that would rest on the shoulders of many of the young ones that come after us. The younger ones. Yeah, we're young too, but the younger ones. And having said that, it is such a pleasure to have with us this evening. He has taken time off his very busy schedule, and as a young senator, must have tremendous calls on his time, but he's energetic and he's up for the task. And it is an honor to introduce our next presenter. He's just come to bless us this afternoon, but I'm sure he has some special things to share with us. Let's welcome Senator the Honorable Judd Cadet.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just want to specially recognize everyone, especially recognize Ms. McQueen. I can remember very well a couple years ago when I sat on the Gender Policy and Action Plan. I think that's the first time we actually had some level of engagement when we were trying to work on that policy and action plan. I also want to recognize Ms. Linda Straker, and as well everyone here. And you, Vonnie, sorry, my eyes was that direction. I especially want to recognize you as well. Interestingly, we're actually only two men in the room, if you exclude the camera guys and the technical guys. I mean, we need more men to be here in those sort of real life examples. COVID-19 is a very serious, dangerous pandemic. No one was really prepared for this virus. And as we try our best to figure out what sort of method, what plans we should put in place to avoid the spread of the virus, some things probably went unnoticed. And things like abuse. In fact, the research would show globally that there is a significant increase. And when I've looked at the statistics in the UK, I think I saw 1,493% increase. Significant increase. And countries are now, while the intention was to protect lives and livelihood, are now realizing that they have to address this other pandemic. And now it is given the terminology of a silent pandemic because it is so ingrained in the fabric of society, and it is a much bigger problem than most people have actually recognized. In some cases, as I was reading from the New York Times, it is referred to an opportunistic infection because the environment is very conducive for such behavior to happen. It is actually flourishing, as the word they used in the current atmosphere. Another article that I was reading said an intimate terrorism was another word they used to describe the current situation. As Brenda was speaking about the situation with some of the Chinese, there was this particular example where a lady by the name of Lily, which is a code name, and they noticed that she was giving her story, and she said that she noticed that during the time of the lockdown, that they were actually having an argument like every hour. And at one point, she was on the balcony, and the husband took a chair and started beating her with the chair. And she couldn't remember anything. Last thing she remembered that she ended up in the hospital. And what was even interesting about that is the fact that she filed for divorce, and even the court system was not very responsive because of the situation with the pandemic. Interestingly, I've heard of the situation with the RGPF and Child Protection Authority, and we seem to be doing very well because the 24-hour hotline was still on. They were still responding to the needs of others, but I still believe that we have a lot more to do. And what we have also noticed from reading and from listening and from also engaging in the conversations is the significant social and economic deprivation which is also contributing to the abuse. And there is a complex interplay between abuse, mental health, substance abuse, socioeconomic factors. And scientists and sociologists are really also trying their best and assessing the best response moving forward. Studies have also found that during this period with COVID, and interestingly, I haven't heard it much from the conversation that we have had, that even the injuries occurred has been more severe than prior to COVID. In fact, one of the radiologists was saying, when I was reading an article, saying that while there was a decrease in road accident, they noticed that there have been an increase in head trauma incidents. A lot of children was getting into the hospital with cranial issues, fractured skulls, and those other situations. Now, I would really hope that these things are not happening here at this point in time. I mean, from the statistics I've heard, there are 38% decline in one of the abuse, and it means that we have to move swiftly. We have a serious responsibility in not only speaking out, but acting. I think we're speaking out a lot. People know about the situation, but it's time for us to act and time for us to root out these things in our communities and in our country. Domestic violence, interesting fact again. They say domestic violence goes up wherever families spend more time together, such as Christmas and summer. And I'm interested to know what the statistic says here in Grenada, because I would believe spending more time together would mean that you would build a bond. But with the COVID situation, you spend more time together, and it's shown to have the adverse effect, and which is basically the stress of the situation. And largely the contributor for that as well, you have to realize that the economic stress that some people had in this situation. You had the situation of many people were no longer had jobs within months, within days. It was not something I could say, okay, in a year time we're preparing for COVID, so let me put aside some funds to last me for 6 months. Within some days, some people were out of jobs. And therefore, government has a serious responsibility, one, to ensure that people get back out to work as soon as possible, but at the same time, we also have a responsibility in ensuring that we maintain public health and safety. And I'm saying this because as young people, as a young person, and I want to speak to also my youth who are listening, that we have a responsibility to champion for those things that we ended, for those things to be rooted out from our society. We have a responsibility to form ourselves into groups and organizations and speak out against those things and hold our government responsible in putting stronger, stiffer legislation in place, but not only the legislation in terms of stiffer penalties, because in some cases the penalties, while they act as preventive measures, is after the fact. The situation have happened. We have to ensure that these things don't happen at all in our society. So in closing, I want to say, yes, we need to speak out. We have to also accept the fact that this is an environment. COVID is a situation that is still existing. It's still taking lives. From the situation, from the last statistics I've checked, you have 864,000 people globally has died from the virus, and millions are affected. And what we have to do, we realize we have a responsibility to. We don't want to have a situation of a next lockdown, because it will also exacerbate the situation, and we have to act on that. So we have a responsibility in the COVID time to ensure that we maintain the healthy practices, continue to practice them. Yes, speak out, yes, act, but we have the responsibility to ensure that we don't have a situation that a single mother or another person in an abuse relationship have to go under lockdown and have to spend her time again in an abusive relationship. And yes, we have a responsibility as well to keep whole government accountable and ensure that we champion the cause for our people. And I know the Ministry of Social Development is doing the best, RGPF is doing the best, but we must agree that there are more that can be done. I want to thank you for the opportunity and the time to present to you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Senator Cadet, for taking the time to come and share with us this evening. And of course, we look forward to you. We're going to thank you in advance for the future hard work that you are going to be doing to ensure that we move forward with our situation in terms of abuse. Our next presenter, she's been in the trenches for a very long time. She's been in the trenches for a very, very, very long time. She probably sleeps, dreams it, eats it, and everything. That's because I guess it's first comes with a passion and a wanting to do, and then there's a science of it. And I must say, over the years, observing, then getting to know her in a professional capacity from interactions with her, it is clear that she's a perfect blend of what we need in terms of social work here in Grenada. So it is a pleasure to introduce the Senior Program Officer for Gender and Family Affairs in the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment, And I would just like to address her as Comrade Elaine Henry McQueen.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Moderator, Brenda Batiste, Comrade Brenda, Senator Judd Cadet, Ms. Rosemarie Charles. Good evening, everyone in the room and everyone who is able to view or listen to this symposium. And of course, I said good evening, but if you're in a place where it's good morning to you, or good afternoon, as the case might be. First, I want to congratulate the Grenada Association of Wellness Professionals for organizing and putting this symposium on. And I've learned it's part of a series, so we look forward to the continuation of the series. We definitely congratulate you and would continue to give any support that is possible to give. We at the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment, we are pleased to be a part of this activity. We are pleased to be able to have this platform to continue the sharing that we would always embrace the opportunity to share on, and that is on abuse and now in the impact of COVID-19. The work on sexual, physical, and emotional abuse started many, many years ago. When I got involved in this kind of work, which is almost like 30 years already, the work had already started. And of course, there is still so much more to do. And sometimes I regret that we are not moving faster. And I know we can move faster. I know we can do more and be more deliberate about what we need to do. We can change society at a faster pace than we are doing right now. And so I want to start off right now by urging all of us in the room to commit to changing society faster so that we would get to the point where Reverend Vonnie spoke about, and that is where we recognize each human being for having his or her dignity and for being a person, a full human being in the image of God. And if we do that at a faster pace, we will be able to eliminate violence against women and girls, or gender-based violence, or abuse against anybody who is more vulnerable than we are. And we'll be able to do it at a faster rate. So I want to just also share that when I speak now, it is mainly from the context of the Domestic Violence Act and to a lesser extent the Criminal Code, because these are the ones I'm more familiar with, not because I'm a lawyer, but because of the nature of the programs that we work with. It's about implementing the laws and even sometimes advocating for amendments where they become necessary. And without the framework of the laws, sometimes it's difficult to act, especially as we are a government entity. So we're really pleased that the Domestic Violence Act was amended in 2010 and came into force in 2011, that the Criminal Code, the sexual offenses provisions in the Criminal Code were amended in 2012, and these form the platform on which we base our work. And of course, alongside that, the Child Protection and Adoption Act and Juvenile Justice Act and so came as part of the process of that law reform. Recently, Grenada was able to conduct, and then just late last month, were able to launch some data on prevalence of intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence in particular. And I just want to share a little bit of the findings. We have seen that from that study, it's called the Women's Health and Life Experience Survey study, and the results are will be available online. Lifetime prevalence of intimate partner violence is 29% in Grenada. 29%. So that basically is like 1 in 3, which is the global average. 1 in 3 being between 30 and 33%. Grenada report shows 29%. That means that over her lifetime, if there are 100 women in a room, within the lifetime of those 100 women, 30 of them, 29 of them to be more specific, would have experienced some form of intimate partner violence or sexual violence, or both. We're talking here, if there are 3 people, to bring it closer, 1 woman, if there are 3 women, one of those women, yeah, I see Linda Straker counting, you are right. Whatever number of women in this room, every 3, one of us would have experienced some form of intimate partner violence or sexual violence, or both. The reality is that, especially in the case of intimate partner violence, no person who experiences intimate partner violence has experienced it only once. I have not yet heard of any report of a victim of intimate partner violence, where there is spousal abuse, boyfriend, girlfriend, visiting partner, living partner abuse, that says it is the only time ever that I experienced that kind of violence. Never. It is always about a combination of acts of abuse, verbal, emotional, or psychological, might be financial or economic, might be sexual, might be physical, might be all happening at the same time. It might have started as what was thought to be a simple thing and escalated to a point where I can't stand it anymore. It's been going on too long. And that is the reality of it. So even when we say that 29% have experienced some form of violence, it means that of those 29%, many of them have had very many opportunities of exposure to some kind of abuse, right? It's repeated. In terms of non-partner sexual violence, the report is that 23.4% of all women in Grenada have experienced some kind of non-partner sexual violence. And that could be indecent exposure, sexual not sexual harassment, but sexual assault or rape or some form of, like incest and so on, some form of sexual violence, 23.4%. And in addition to that, 26.6% have experienced sexual harassment. And from those figures, the reports are from that survey, 20.5% have indicated that they experienced sexual abuse while they were children. So that study was done among adults. And when the adult women were asked, have you experienced sexual abuse whilst you were a child? 20.5% of them said, yes, I have experienced some form of sexual violence before I had gotten to the age of 18. We've seen things like the age of the early sexual initiation, and the fact that a significant number of women have indicated that their very first sexual encounter was through some form of assault or rape, especially rape. So what do we do with that information? It has to first jolt us into recognizing that something has to be done. But as somebody would have said earlier, and I think Janelle from the Child Protection Authority indicated, prevention is better than cure. So prevention is very important. But alongside the prevention, we have to be able to respond appropriately to victims, and we also have to be able to hold offenders accountable. So that is the nature of the work. Sometimes we had thought that victims do not speak out, and we have heard before and seen and done in Grenada speak out campaigns. The survey has told us that victims do speak out. Sometimes they speak out. The majority of them spoke to a parent, a sibling, a sister or brother, or friends. That's where the majority of people speak, and depends on the response they get from the parent or sister or brother, close family member, or friends. They may or may not go further. Therefore, it means that as siblings, as parents, as children, as friends of persons who are abused, we have to encourage those victims to speak to the relevant authorities then who can help, especially if we are not able to provide the kind of support that we need to. And also in the thrust to keep offenders accountable. There is also research, not from this particular study, but that says that offenders sometimes continue their offending. So, our partner, one of our partners, the Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic, has a program based on that finding, that if in the case of intimate partner violence, we say the response is that the persons separate, the victim chooses to leave the abusive relationship. And that is one option. That is always an option. The offender is likely to have another intimate relationship at some point in his or her life after, right? And that same offender is likely to be an offender in that new relationship as well. So holding offenders accountable is very important, whether they stay in the same relationship that they're in or they're preparing to move to new relationships, all right? I also want to point out to us that many of the victims do not ask for help. They don't tell anyone. So as I said, a significant number speak to parents and friends and sisters and brothers. A smaller but also very significant number told no one at all, not even their closest friend or closest relative. And the two most common reasons given for not seeking help were that they thought the abuse was normal, as one, and the other is that they assumed they would not be believed. So let us take the one about thinking that abuse is normal and reflect on our own society and the kind of change that we need to make in our society so that victims and abusers would know that abuse is not normal. When we say things like, if this boy hit you and box you and pull in your hair and pull in your skirt, and so when you're going to school, and we say, oh, it's caracal love or puppy love, we are telling the child who is likely to be a preteen or early teenager at the time, it is okay for somebody to pinch you and squeeze you and pull out the chair from below you when you're ready to sit down because they like you. We are teaching that abuse is normal. When we talk to our children, even when they are younger, and we say to them, and sometimes we don't actually do it, but many times, I say talk very loosely here, but if a child misbehaves, and we say to the child something like, come out there, go break your foot. That is teaching the child that breaking somebody's foot is a normal thing. You can say it, then you can do it. Violence is normal. And whether that person is male or female, we've normalized violence in our households and in our society, and we have to do something about that, right? Victims grew up thinking it's normal. Offenders grew up thinking violence is normal. And therefore, we have to address that in our society. Violence and abuse is not normal, whether it's committed against a child or an adult. We also have to ensure that victims can learn to trust the systems that are in place, because we have to let them know that they would be believed by the system and hopefully by their friends and family as well. What has COVID done? The period of the COVID-19 response in Grenada, we have seen an intensity of violence. Sometimes it's not just about the number of victims or the number of reports, but it is also about the nature of the incident that they're describing. And there seems to be an intensification of the kind of violence that is happening in already violent situations, right? So that was one thing that was noticed by responders and so on. We've also noticed that there have been gaps in services, which we knew for a long time, but the gaps became more obvious because we were in an emergency situation. And many of the services, whilst they continued to function, like our gender-based violence unit and the special victims unit and so on, continued to function, we did not necessarily have a sort of seamless transition to emergency situation or ways to fast-track certain things when not everybody is on site at work. So that's a gap that became quite obvious during the COVID time. Another gap that emerged has to do with increased burden of care. That increased burden of care within the home created some stress, continues to create some stress among especially the primary caregivers who are women. And I'm saying who are women because that's the tradition, not that the way it's supposed to be. But that increased burden of care means that more people were at home, more time is spent at home, therefore there was more cleaning to do. And people were saying wash hands how many times a day and sing for however long and so on. These are things we've had to do. And that we have to clean everything more often, anytime. Sometimes we might have worn maybe a pair of jeans a few times before we washed it. And then it's like every time you move, you go out and you come back, don't wear the same clothing more than once, and things like that. Increasing the burden of care. Who has to do that washing and the stress that's related to it, and so on. Then there is homeschooling. And whether the person who is the primary caregiver or not is working outside for pay or working from home, they now have to deal often with homeschooling. And because we do not yet have a society where the care work is shared equally between all the adults in the household, tensions are created. Yeah? And of course, we have to talk about the prospect and reality of caring for the sick, not only about the homeschooling and all of that. So the burden of care is real. There was increased economic hardship, and someone's mentioned that. And that economic hardship we saw emerging because of a high level of informal work in the Grenadian society, but also that there was formal work. There is formal work, or work in the formal sector, but it is unsecure work in the formal sector, which is also a challenge for persons when there are situations like these. How easily someone could be without any benefits or without an income. Because although you're in the formal sector, the work is very insecure. We have situations where households and many adults do not have independent livelihoods, and therefore relying on livelihoods from a visiting partner, from child maintenance, from remittances from abroad, and so on, and in where there is this kind of global difficulty, it leads to economic hardship. And therefore, what Reverend James spoke about, transactional sex and the stresses related to that, and it's real. We've also seen that the uncertainty and fear for the future is a challenge. Schools are reopening. We're trying to reopen the economy. There are changes in routines, job and school routines and so on, and that is creating some challenge. How well we maneuver this period can impact on how stressed we are, how we feel in terms, and therefore how susceptible we are to things like emotional abuse, whether causing it or feeling, emotionally stressed and drained. There is hope. And I just want to end with saying there is hope, that we will continue to work with victims, we will continue to support them and protect victims. We will continue to hold offenders accountable. As a nation, we have to do it, right? We have to continue to prevent abuse, but to do that, we have to strengthen the institutions and the relationships among the institutions that have to work to do it. And therefore, we are pleased at this point that Grenada is the recipient of the Spotlight Initiative project from the UN system and the European Union. It's a bit delayed, but things are in place to get it back on track. And under that, there would be opportunities to do all of those things: support victims, strengthen laws and institutions around this kind of issue, abuse and violence in the households. We'll be able to improve services and make data more available and engage civil society organizations. We continue to provide services at the ministry. The helpline that was started during the COVID-19 period, number 440-4787, it continues to operate. And the gender-based violence unit, psychosocial services unit, and probation unit, and so on, all the services are continuing. And I'm sure that if we do end up in another lockdown period, we will know better now what to do than we did in March. I trust that we will. And we're continuing to work on economic empowerment. But it doesn't take our ministry alone, and even only the partners who are in this room today. It calls on all of us to work together to create the change that is necessary. Let us use the information that we have as a wake-up call. The more important thing is to make the change in our society that needs to be made. I thank you.
Thank you very, 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 very much. Always full of substance and the right tone and tenor, if you will. Let's hear it again for the Senior Program Officer of Gender and Family Affairs, Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment, Mrs. Comrade Elaine Henry McQueen. We are moving along. Normally during any given period, and we are guilty of that in Grenada, that we who are busy, normal people going about the fray of life, that we often forget those who are less abled. And so our next presenter comes to us from the Grenada National Council for the Disabled. It's a pleasure to invite Miss Hilary Gabriel.
With protocol already established, a pleasant good evening to everyone. So much was said, and I will be focusing more on persons with disabilities. And I would like to firstly thank Sister Rosemarie and her team for affording us this wonderful opportunity to let our voices be heard. Because most of the times we are not given those opportunities. Also, if I do this without thanking my Honorable Minister, Delma Thomas, and the team at the Ministry of Social Development for their continued support to our organization. And it brings me straight into the COVID period. If we understand what is a disability, And if I may share a little of it with you, it's a condition that makes it more difficult for a person to do certain activities or interact with the world around them. These conditions could be impairments. It may be cognitive, developmental, intellectual, mental, physical, sensory, or a combination of multiple factors. So I have a little question. Don't you think Mr. COVID is a new form of disability? I believe so. Because we did not plan for Mr. COVID. We did not expect Mr. COVID, but he made his grand appearance. So we had to do what we had to do for persons with disabilities, because they are persons who are abused just like any one of us, and even more because they are most vulnerable. Permit me to let you know that disability abuse is real, and it is when a person with a disability is abused physically, and I didn't hear mention of financially today at all. Financially, sexually, psychologically, and all of this is due to the person having the disability. And we have to remember that disability abuse has also been considered a hate crime. And I have that in bold letters. It's a hate crime. And we see it all the time in our society. People with disabilities, especially women and girls, and you see how we have to work together. Sister Elaine spoke about the abuse with women. That does not say just women. It means women with disabilities and girls with disabilities. We have to put them in the spotlight. Most of the times we leave them out, but there are people too. So they too, and as I said, they are most vulnerable. Women and girls, and that's twice likely as other women and girls experience violence. So it's across the board. When a gentleman wants to go and abuse somebody, or the abuse about to take, they wouldn't say that person have a disability, you know. They abuse. They abuse them, and they still even think it's better to do them than to do Brenda. And we have to speak out. It is real. It is real. And I'm getting emotional. We need to speak out and help these people. We have to be our neighbor's keeper. And they are people too. And I believe that they should be the first report that should be reported. All the reports should be reported. But I think because most of the time they are forgotten and they are abused because they are vulnerable. While anyone can experience violence, abuse, or neglect, people with disabilities, as I said, are at greater risk. In our Grenadian context, they are abused just as any one of us. And I can tell you, during the COVID time, we had that experience. When we got the reports that these persons, and you know, abuse is, if you don't give me food, that's an abuse, you know. Don't you believe it? So during COVID, persons with disabilities couldn't get their food. That was a form of abuse, and some people not even helping them make it even worse. So the poor thing, they're at home, I am eating, they cannot eat. You're eating, they cannot eat. That's another form of abuse. So we have to look out for them and speak out. As a person with a disability, they have the rights to freedom. I think Brother Vonnie spoke about that. Respect, equality, and dignity. I want to repeat. They have the rights to freedom, and not just freedom, you know, freedom with a vigor. Respect, equality, and dignity. They also have the right to live their full potential, to have control over your own life. They want to be independent. I had an experience Monday. I went to a certain institution. And I believe they looked at me as being rude, but I was rude with a cause. I had to go up the stairs. So I said to them, I have somebody in the vehicle using a wheelchair. The gentleman said to me, somebody will come down to them. I said, no way. I said, no. That is an abuse of the person's right to be independent. I said, the person needs to get upstairs. And I would not stand here and allow anybody to come and deal with them here. Their business would not be private. And I refused. Because that was abusing the person's right. That goes with a responsibility as a citizen of this country. So they have their work cut out, and they will get it right. And when you speak out, they will get it right. If you or someone you know is experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect in the hands of an individual, please, we ask that you speak out for them and also seek help. There are places where they can go to get help. During COVID, we were told that certain institutions were open, and I must commend the Ministry of Social Development, Child Protection Authority. The Royal Grenada Police Force was really, really supportive of us during COVID-19. We had their help right out. Women with disabilities are more often victims of violence, and they are less likely to get help. And I say this because we experienced it during COVID. A family with a young baby. What you do outside with this baby? Nobody to bring something for her. She had to go. Cover up the baby properly, and she was out there. She had to get it. What could she have done? In fact, violence against women and girls with disabilities is twice as likely to occur when compared to women and girls without disabilities. And this is true. I would like to also say too, that in Grenada, there are services, there are places that we can go if people are experiencing violence, abuse, and neglect. Child Protection Authority is there. We have the Ministry of Social Development. We have the Council of the Disabled, because we have to look after our persons. We have GNOW, GNCRC, and also the Special Victims Unit. During COVID, persons with disabilities reported to us that it was the worst experience for them because it was a pandemic that we did not expect. And even quote-unquote able-bodied persons couldn't get out. Could you imagine someone with a disability? It's left for us to be in their shoes to understand what they went through. Where we came in, we realized, as I said before, they're uniquely vulnerable. And at a time like this, they were more prone to the disruptive consequences of COVID-19. As an organization, we cannot do it by ourselves. So as part of our response to the COVID pandemic, the GNCD collaborated with over 21 persons in making food and more things accessible to the members, to all members and the community alike. And in keeping with the operational guidelines in relation to COVID-19, such as social distancing, the council partnered with the Ministry of Social Development. And please permit me to list them because I have something to say after listing them. SADU, St. Andrew's Development Organization, Step Out Supermarket, Acts of Kindness, the Grandans Hotspot, Gerald S.W. Smith, St. Paul's Citizen Advisory of the St. Paul's Policing District, Grenada Distillers, the Board of Directors of GNCD, the staff, St. David's Pharmacy, Mr. Philip and Mr. Dwayne Lewis, that's 2 bus owners who donated their transport free of cost to us. The Royal Grenada Police Force, the Ministry of Agriculture, Ms. Simone Lewis, Mr. Lazarus Joseph, Golden Crust Bakery, Kendall Ross, and Mr. Teron Francis. And I call the names GAP, I forgot GAP, to let you know that during the lockdown, we were opened. We sought permission from the police and were able to use these buses who donated their time. Two young men made sure over 270 persons with disabilities received their care packages from March until August. And at this point, it has increased to 320. We gave out some today. And this included Carriacou and Petit Martinique. Now, the persons doing that, they have families too. So we had to take care of ourselves. Because if you don't take care of yourself, how could you take care of other persons? And in so doing, we took one day and sat together and looked at what we did. Tried to look at our weak areas and our strengths. We didn't remember ourselves. So I said, okay, half an hour goes to us. And we sat there and thought next time what we can do to make ourselves even better, because we have families to feed and the same alike. And would you believe what came out of that 30 minutes? We were amazed that every day most of us went out, we didn't have breakfast. We abused ourselves. We did not take breakfast, but we were so inclined to go out and help those persons out there that we know what it was. So I think we just rushed into it and make sure that we got it right for them. And when we visited these homes, Sister Milo there still? Yes. When she spoke, she reminded me of some of the persons that we visited. Y'all must come along with us one day. Don't be afraid. When you go to see the condition of some of these persons, and it was during COVID, when they saw you, it was a good smile on their faces. Another one asked me, when next audio come in? I said, we will call you. It was heartbreaking during COVID to see these persons. One told me he couldn't even go to the bank, he couldn't go to the credit union, but he was so happy when he got his bag, he got his bread, they got down to chicken. They had meat to cook. It was a challenge, but we faced it. And I must say, we hope that Mr. COVID turned his back on us so we could continue what we started before Mr. COVID came. But it taught us a lesson that we must not take people for granted. And persons with disabilities are persons that we should not, even before COVID, we could have moved around with them, but during COVID was the worst experience because, you had to stay your 6 feet, and that was the meat of the thing. You had to stay. We had to actually stay and hand it to them, but they were thankful for what they got. So I am saying here today, we have to look out for each other. We have to be our neighbor's keeper and do not take persons with disabilities for granted. In those times, they need us more than even before, because they are most vulnerable. And these are the persons who, sometimes there's only one person in a household. They can't turn left, they can't turn right, but they just depend on somebody. Just a little call to say how you're doing, it will help. And another thing that I noticed during COVID is that these people, when we went to one, I think that one was in Cloget, and you know, somebody rose so bad. When she looked at me, she said, "Miss, how you make it up?" I said, "By the grace of God, we came." She said, "Hold on to this and hold on to that when you're going back, you know, because I want you to come back." When I heard that, I was like, really? I was so happy that I could have gone out and spoken to these people, because from March to then, the people inside, as we called it, the lockdown, they couldn't get a call to call it. You know, it was just, you know, another, but we made it. And as I said, we gave them the groceries during the lockdown. And thank God we didn't come down with the virus. So once again, I'd like to really thank Rosemarie and her team for affording us this opportunity to speak briefly as to what we did during COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Ms. Hilary Gabriel, the head of the Grenada National Council for Disabled. And I like to say people that are differently abled. I don't like to disable them, because if you interact with them, you would find that they are differently and otherwise abled than we are. That's what it is, really. Thank you for looking out. Thanks for the work of your organization and all that you have been able to do and what you have highlighted here today. I trust that there be some follow-up and some special honing in on the folks that are differently able, as they too already, you know, whatever challenges they have now have to face with this insurmountable one called COVID-19. As we move along, I'm delighted to invite our next presenter. Of course, in all of these social things, the media is a critical stakeholder in it. The fact that media persons normally come into information or interact, or for some reason, people normally find people in the media who may be able to help them with situations. One day I'll probably write a little book about that, but for now, shall remain as quiet as it is. But it's a pleasure to introduce a freelance journalist, no stranger, Linda Straker.
Thank you, and good evening to all, our online audience, as well as our physically present audience here. I must thank Rosemarie Charles for giving me the blessings to be part of this year. Last year, I actually were in another island when this was taking place, and I guess she didn't forget, and this year came to me quite early. The topic this afternoon is abuse during COVID, the pandemic. And from everything that was said here this evening, I'm glad that I am at number 9, because the media plays a role in documentation. And years from now, we may have maybe our other generation, like my granddaughter and others, researching what happened during this pandemic. I, in my capacity as a journalist, have found myself reading a lot of documentation of what happened in 1920 pandemic. And before we started, Brenda and I were speaking, and it's amazing that some of the same concerns that was happening then is happening now, in particular the issue of wearing masks. There were persons who formed association against masks and demonstrated, and it's just amazing the amount of information that is online now. And that is where persons like myself and Brenda, who work in the media, we come in. We document things for the future. The role of the media in any circumstance, we are journalists, people call us. Now they will give us all sorts of names, but we really and truly document events of the world. Without us as writers, a lot of things will be gone unnoticed. And so some things people think did not happen before has happened, but failure to document it would make some people feel, oh, this is new and this is first time. As I sit here this afternoon, I am in journalism 23 years plus. And Elaine said she has been in, 30 years fighting. When I entered the world of media, I found myself as part of the time covering the area of social development, which covered the place like GNCRC and all the women organization. And I had no choice because I was assigned to it. And so I am very, very fully aware of what has happened over the years. I have actually been part of committees that has helped draft the domestic violence bill. And I remember the argument, the debate over a definition for that. Hillary mentioned about financial abuse. It is written in the domestic violence bill about financial abuse. But just speaking about what would have happened as a journalist during COVID period, like every other place around the world, journalists, not the state, nobody was prepared for it. And so when it started in China, we all remember with Grenada having a number of students there, how some persons reacted to bring our students home. And this was actually among the first documented stories of Grenadians calling on the state to take action to protect young ones in China. That was December, early January. However, by the time early March, and the U.S. started having its own cases, and the U.S. would have locked down Europe, we saw the things coming closer to us. And the closer it got to us, is the more excited we saw things was happening in our region, because we are now, it is closer, we're closer to the U.S. and we're closer to Europe. And then came March 22nd. It was a Sunday, and an invitation was sent to media to be at the ministerial complex for a news conference for 1 o'clock. I live in St. John's, way up. And then I was told he's going to come live on using the virtual technology. And in the world of media, once something is sent out, such an emergency, we start calling each other. Did you hear anything? And everybody was now calling each other. And nobody seems to have known until some of them it was a Sunday, and they went to the ministerial complex, Works Conference Room, and their minister still was announcing our first case. And you literally felt and see the comments in the Facebook Live. There was not pleasing. There was the worst you could say about the minister, the worst you could say about the government in particular. That was March 22nd. And despite it being in Facebook comment, because it is saved in archive, you can go back and see how it has been documented. On that March 22nd, that afternoon, in shock, I would say, how our people reacted. Because now COVID was in Grenada, and we were hearing everything you could not think about was being said. And I believe right after that, a news conference was called as part of the weekly post cabinet. And it was, persons who are listening to me on Facebook may not be aware. Eventually, it was then, we had it on it was the first Zoom news conference we had. Because senior media persons decided to work, some of us work from behind the scenes, the whole condition of COVID, the fear and everything. Because COVID brought on a fear in every person. Any child with understanding or listening to conversations in the house, there was a fear. We had to break it down to my granddaughter as to what is this, and she used to call it the germs, and you have to wash your hands, right? That fear. And from then, the documentation of what is happening in this pandemic, in the health sector in particular, became national attention. Minister Steele became the bearer of bad news. Whenever you heard a news conference and you saw Minister Steele, you know it were not good news. And then one day I realized that he was wearing that jacket. I did not understand what it meant, so I called the PS, not the PS at the time, it was the CMO, Dr. Martin, because Dr. Martin was also wearing that jacket. And I told myself that had to mean something, because I was also seeing, when Antigua was talking, the Prime Minister I said, this had to mean something. And then they explained to me what the jacket would mean. And as a matter of fact, during the comments on the comment section of the Facebook, whenever there was a news conference, persons was constantly complaining, why is he wearing this jacket? And I said, well, they don't understand, it means something. I believe I did an article explaining what this jacket meant. But again, all of that is part of the pandemic. Now, in the midst of covering all these health stories, we were now placed on the regular curfew, and the police was having this daily briefings at 8:30 in the morning. Very early, and those of us who were there, because it is all part of documentation, we had no choice. And the police was providing us with the data of what they were doing, and sometime afterwards we will have joining the health sector and will tell us what is happening. And journalists are keeping this data. We are processing it through newscasts. And then, for me, because I do have a background I used to work at a rights-based office at one time. I have a lot of persons who knew me from that era. I started receiving personal calls of what to do, of abusive situation. Delroy, who works in the Ministry of Social Development, I think he can attest to the amount of time I would have forwarded information to him, and then he would tell me, this has been dealt with. Because persons were now personally calling some people because of situation. At one point in time, this lady was telling me how she had no money because the father had to put money through the court, and the court was not opening. I personally called the AG. I said, Mr. AG, we have a serious problem, and you need to find a way to deal with this. These women need money, and the money for some of them, they know it is in the court. While what some of them tried doing, they went to the father directly, and he was bold enough. Some of these men were bold enough to say they're not giving it to them because it has to go through the court. We said common sense makers use of discretion, but to some of them it was a reason to keep on the abuse, as Hillary would have mentioned. They just withdraw the finance. They know. So I received personal call about it. And in the midst of doing all of that, as a student, as someone who believe in continuous education, I got a notice from Nice University of a special course for journalists to cover how to cover the pandemic. And they sent it out. It was a 4-week course every day. We had to be in class for about 3 to 4 hours. And I signed up for it. Another journalist here signed up for it. The people realizing the impact this could have on our Caribbean, they were quite disappointed that enough Caribbean journalists did not sign up for it. And in Grenada, I would tell you it was myself and Leslie Ann Johnson, the head of GIS at the time. We became buddies. I know she was under pressure, so on night time I would call her and we would go through this thing. And I was quite happy. Now, this was a pilot. I really knew that there was a pilot. And it covered journalists. Over 9,000 journalists around the world was doing it, literally teaching us how to document everything that is happening in this pandemic. And Leslie and I successfully completed it. We both completed this thing quite happily. And last week I heard the WHO director, that's Dr. Tedros, he was now telling journalists that they can do this thing. It is now in open. You can just go and sign up. Yeah. But it is a very intense course. It covers from how to cover the health aspect, how they do recognize the violence aspect in it. That's the social aspect. So we're given tips on it, covering the pandemic. Now, before I close, I must say, with covering the police, one of the things that happening now, we were not able to get a lot of information about abuse and other social aspects. Now, listening today to Ms. Milo and Hillary and Elaine and the police, I am now in a position to go tomorrow. You would most likely see me writing more stories, documenting, because all of this is linked to COVID and the pandemic. Covering a pandemic like that, it started in 1918 and concluded somewhere around 1920. In our case, it started in in 2019. We're now in 2020. So the science and projection will tell you it's most likely going to go on for another 2 years. And throughout that period, what is really required is for us as journalists, and we are documenting every angle because we need the data. I am one journalist who believes in a lot of data. So when the officer spoke about the number of protected orders that they had to take out during that period, as much as it was shocking, but at the same time, the police is telling us there has been a reduction. So where you would have seen a reduction in reporting, we have a leapfrog increase in protective order. It tells a big, wide story that during the period of COVID, abuse was not reported to the relevant authorities as they should. And the persons involved who work directly in the field can give you a lot of reasons were shared here this evening, whether people was fearful, they were frightened, they was not sure offices were open, and then I understand now why they started calling persons directly. So Brenda would have got some call, you would have got some call. And these are people who you know and they trust, and they can speak to you with a level of confidence that the business will not be on the street. Because they would have told me some things before, and they didn't hear it on the street, but it got resolved because I called and spoke to the appropriate personnel. And so, whereas we did not get all the data that we see happening now, I am getting it now. And this is going to be painting the real picture of our social situation as what happened during the pandemic. So we did not get it during the pandemic. We are getting it now. And as Elaine is saying, if we have to go in a lockdown, which I prefer we do not have to, it did not affect me nor my home too harshly. But I realized a lot of people was painfully affected during that period. If it, for some reason that we have to go back to that, there will be some lessons that were learned, and hopefully it will be a different way. We don't know what will happen. We pray that we don't have to, but the lessons learned in that initial or piloting stage is too much for some people. And so now if we've seen persons going to the doctor with depression, and depression comes in the many different forms. And as reporters, those of us who follow that, again, I use data and others would use data to show how the variance is. And COVID has actually just started. We have completed like a pilot stage, and now we're heading to another stage. So hopefully by the time Christmas, we can talk about, praise others of positive things that is now happening as a result of COVID. And very lastly, I again stress, persons who are being abused, do not be afraid to call the relevant bodies. Call them. I am just one person. I will take the data and do the presentation to the public after. And the public sometimes pick and choose things to get emotional about. Last year, we had over 600 cases being reported. But if you look at the newspapers and you look at newscasts, not a third of it was reported in the press. If you look at the period April to August, not 1/10 of it was reported. Last week, when the police had a news conference, in the midst of it, the acting commissioner mentioned of a 68-year-old man who was charged for sexually assaulting a 9-year-old. And I don't think anybody saw that story anywhere. Not a zip. I did not even do it. Because what was some people say? When you focus on that little 9-year-old, there are others involved. And my reason for not focusing directly on it, because I wanted more data. I actually called around, seeing I could get some data. I was actually sending a formal request, which I did to a particular agency. and I'm awaiting. I received a call yesterday saying that the person in charge of it was not in office, and I will get it when they come into office, because I wanted to present some data, but I realized I got a lot of data here this evening, and so I promise you that as part of my COVID pandemic writing, you are going to see at least 3 stories between now and next week about the things that were shared here. It is said openly on Facebook, so it is now public, and persons can go back, and I will put it in documentation of what will happen, so that 100 years from now, those who are around there may be something they have to deal with. And my documentation and the documentation of others would assist them in going through the pilot phase. I thank you.
Thank you very, 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 very much, Linda Straker. Really appreciate it. Of course, I trust folks get some appreciation as to, how the media is supposed to work through this. It's really not about the sensational aspects of the stories, but really collecting data, highlighting, seeing why, how, and otherwise. And just to say, indeed, we should be guided by what happened in the 1918 to 1920. It was 2 years, the flu pandemic of that era, as Linda mentioned. And yes, the one constant in the pandemic, there are similarities between 1918 to 1920 and 2019 to 2020. The one constant? Human beings. Because the way they behaved in 1918 to 1920 and what we're doing now is basically the same. Actually, I was reading somewhere in 1919, there was an anti-mask league that was formed. It was that formal, right? And there were protests all over. And the public health ordinances, remember that little COVID-19 bill? Oh yes, people were up in arms because they were trying to introduce bills like those all over the world. And people were like, why are they trying to control us? Yeah, it's the same things were happening. And of course, there was mass vaccination, all of that, there are similarities. And so those of us who love history, we always say that we need to be informed by history because for some reason, it's a cycle and it just keeps coming. But anyway, we press on and we move on with us. This evening we have a very, very, very special individual, a special lady, of course. And here we are addressing abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, and the impact of COVID-19. But our next presenter, really, a lot of the things that we are hearing and things that we are speaking about, we are hearing them from scientists in the room. We are hearing them from people involved in social work and other things. But many of us have never experienced any of what we have heard. All right? We only probably could try to empathize, because sometimes it's hard. Because you can't really walk in those shoes if it never happened to you. Because sometimes it can be very grotesque and gruesome. And even just hearing it makes your stomach churn. And so it's a pleasure to have with us today a survivor. She is Keisha McFarlane. She is from the land of reefs, the beautiful Carriacou. And she is here with us, a strong survivor, a beautiful woman, to just talk to us a bit. Whatever she wants to tell us about whatever. Please welcome Keisha McFarlane.
Afternoon, everybody. Well, it's good night. I should say good evening. First, I want to say thank you, Rosemarie, for having me, because it's a pleasure, and it's been a very long time. Honestly, it's been a long time. I had this in here, carrying it around, and before I start, I want to say it's It's not easy. It never been an easy road, but by me telling my story, I believe that it's going to help somebody somehow, somewhere, and this is my intention. So I'll just give a little of my story, how my life started out. As I said to people, I can't tell the first time. Everybody used to say, young people sitting in a group, everybody want to give their experience of, having that first date or that first boyfriend. It wasn't like that for me. So I don't sit with group and give that experience. So I wrote something, I wouldn't cry, but I will tell it as much as I can. So I remember it was just like yesterday. I would never forget that day. The day it took away my pride and my innocence. The day everything turned dark and cold. I was around 13. I was brave, respectable, kind, and hardworking. My mother had 10 of us, but out of the 10, my brother and I had to pay the price because my father was not even paying attention to us. I remember this man saying to us, to me especially, if you work for me, cook for me, you will be able to eat or you'll be able to go to school. He said, you will be my daughter. So to me, it's like I get a father figure. My father is not there, so I feel really proud and honored. Also to see my mother have 10 children and struggling, I feel responsible as a big daughter to go and wash and cook and clean. And then that day came when it all happened. I felt numb the first time. So I just lie there like a piece of log and feeling that sweat running down on my body. And he said to me, you're tight and you're nice. That's how I like it. I couldn't even scream. I wanted to stop, but there was no way I could have stopped. For years, many, many years, it happened. Just 1 minute. I remember when I wouldn't go at his house. And once he reported to my mother, I would get a lot of licks or sleep outside. I was hanging the roof with a rope on my neck, beaten with cable wire. I was told that was rude. I also wanted to fit in. My mother would send me to live with many people. And every time I give rudeness and thought I would go back to stay with my family, I was sent somewhere else to stay. So to me, I was like a sheep trying to fit in a pig pen. I felt uncomfortable. One day in school, I was in Form 3, and I remember having a bad headache. I heard voices echoing in my head. After a couple hours, I woke up and realized I was in a place called Radom. It was close to the General Hospital. I was placed there. I said, well, maybe I was crazy because I just see people walking around, some looking like if they were zombie watching one of those horror movies. And they said to me, you have a nervous breakdown. We have to evaluate you for a couple months. After evaluation, I journeyed back to Karakou, the place where I dread so much. My sibling love saw me now turn into fear. I started to wear black. I never looked in the mirror. I hated myself. I didn't want to live in Karakou anymore, not around my siblings or anybody. So I took a ride on a boat called Adelaide, and I ran to the mainland. I didn't care where I was going. I would find refuge by anybody that said they loved me. And I was picked up by the police and brought to Sister Nelson Francis. the social worker at the time. At the time, I was known as a rude little girl, but Sister Francis, she believed in me. I was placed in the Bele home for children. I was the first person and the only girl at the home at the time. So to me, it was a prison. After, a lot of young ladies started to join me, and I had to make them feel comfortable. So I became a big sister. I had a lot of responsibilities. And through that responsibility, I learned my talent of writing plays and acting them out. I still was lost and drowning in depression. The men that was employed at the home to help protect us wanted to replay our dark and cold encounters. I felt refreshed, my memories, and I wanted to die so desperately. I felt dying was the only way my pain will go away. I swallowed 2,500 milligram pills so I could fall asleep and never wake up. The next thing I knew, I was taken to the hospital and flushed out my system. I was so upset to be alive. I was upset with the manager and the whole world. I was so upset that I wasn't speaking to anyone at the home for months. I received counseling, and through this counseling session, I understood that my cold and dark encounter was not my fault. I had blamed myself for years. I started to speak positively and decided not to allow this encounter to ruin my future. I became very important at the home. I wrote the pledge so the young lady and I would recite. I got my first job at the Aquarium restaurant. I had tea with the Governor General, Sir Daniel Williams, and his wife. I took classes at St. George's University. Today, I feel proud. I'm a proud mother of 2. I volunteer my talent and my time to many organizations. I even own my own business. It's called Kayak Teas, locally made bubble tea bags. I just want to say to parents, encourage and pay attention to your children. Take note to the changes. Tell them you love them. Speak encouraging words. Tell them at all times and build their self-esteem. Let them know that they are beautiful, handsome. You love and appreciate them and proud of them. To the young persons out there, I urge you, please don't allow your past to define who you are. Think positively. As Buju Banton say in a song, and trust me, this is my song, I love it. I was buried alive, but I'm still breathing. I don't know what tomorrow may bring, but I got feelings. I'm alive, and there must be a reason. I was given one more chance, and my heart's still beating. Be determined to win, and be determined to live. I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Keisha McFarlane. I saw it for Keisha one more time. You are truly a survivor, brave, strong, beautiful, and I trust that today, this evening, you touched someone out there who, even if it's only one person, whose circumstance that you can be altered. So thank you so very much, Keisha. Okay, trying to be brave now. Try not to put down the ugly cry. Yeah. So thank you so much, wonderful people. These sessions are also always so very, they tug at the heartstrings, they tug at the brain, your emotions, you're on the gamut of emotions, And I believe those things happen because we are supposed to be roused to act and to do something about, whatever it is that we're feeling. Again, Rosemarie Charles, the lovely Rosemarie Charles, Rosemarie's Cosmetics, that is her company. But Rosemarie was moved to do this last year after so many things was happening in our community as it relates to abuse and sexual violence, intimate partner abuse of young girls and boys, let's not forget boys. And so in October last year, the first symposium was held. And of course, this follow-up one, which is so timely, abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, and the impact of COVID-19. Rosemarie is also the president of the Grenada Wellness Professionals. Now, wellness and all of this is tied together. So in case you're wondering, why is Rosemarie doing that? Of course, it's natural for Rosemarie to do this if wellness is her thing. Because as we found out here this afternoon, as the various presenters made their presentations, provided us with data, Child Protection Authority, the police, the Probation Office, Social Development, GNCD, as all of them made their presentations and provided data, we realized that there was one jarring weakness that happened during COVID, in that these people were not cohesive during the period, so they couldn't take care of the wellness of those who were being abused or being at risk. So just to kind of encapsulate, basically, y'all had me taking a lot of notes. So what came out from the various presenters was clearly that during the pandemic, during any pandemic, I would think, even an epidemic or a crisis time, but during this time, it was kind of harder for sexual and reproductive health workers to actually screen, to find people with gender-based violence issues, and referral pathways to that care that was disrupted because of COVID. All right, the presenters highlighted that an increase in sexual and gender-based violence was observed during the lockdown. The noticeable period was April through August. Of course, we were locked down real tight from about April to June, right, thereabout. And during the lockdown, response efforts focused on containing the disease. It really did not focus as much as preventing the issues. That focus was important, of course, containing the disease. But, protocols were never established. Protocols were established for COVID. Those protocols were not established to protect girls, women, boys, people who were differently abled, as we heard from Ms. Gabriel, and from violence during the outbreak. Quarantines and school closures were put in place to contain the spread of the disease, but that left women and adolescent girls and boys at risk, because for some of them, school is their home, school is their family, school is their protection. Let us not forget our men during this period. We didn't touch much on them, but having just spoken to a couple men, and even one reaching out to me, was in a very vulnerable state. Men are being challenged. Their very value, they are being emasculated in homes where they were the breadwinner, where they felt mighty and powerful, taking care of their family, and now they have lost their jobs and are being treated differently in the home. So they themselves are having those challenges. Some are responding violently, some may respond in other ways that we would not want. So let us pay attention to that. As the women, girls, and boys, and men, they were left vulnerable to coercion, exploitation, sexual abuse, and as such, the enormity of the social issues of this pandemic may be our biggest fallout of the pandemic that needs immediate attention. sorry to be the bearer of that sort of, yeah, but if we are going to be honest about these things, and it's just based, this is not my emotion, this was based on the data presented. And I feel good because it means that the objective was achieved, because the topic was the impact of the COVID on abuse, sexual, emotional, and physical. So once again, Rosemarie, I'd like to congratulate you. And at this juncture, I would like to invite you to move the thank you. Rosemarie Charles, President of the Association of Wellness Professionals of Grenada.
Good evening to everybody. I must say that I'm very grateful to everyone. First of all, the viewing public for tuning in. I realize people are actually tuning in, and they would have an opportunity to look at it again on GIS and other platforms. We'll try to get it around as much as possible. I want to say thank you very much to Brenda Baptiste, who we can always rely on all the time. Linda Straker, we can rely on her all the time. And we have Miss Elaine, forgive me for, but representing the Ministry of Social Development, and Minister Delma Thomas, who has a very important or a different important engagement that she really could not have been here, and I know she would have loved to be here. She's always very passionate about issues such as this, and most of the speakers mention her because definitely they know how passionate she is. And I want to thank Hilary Gabriel from the Disabled Council, who did an excellent job, as always, very passionate about disabled people or differently abled people. One thing about Ms. Gabriel is that nobody can get away with even saying the slightest negative or harming a disabled person. You would have to contend with Ms. Hilary Gabriel, apart from the police. Not just the police, but Ms. Gabriel is going to get you personally. So I admire that about her. I know a lot of years, and I admire that about her. We had Diane Jeffrey, Mrs. Jeffrey, who is the principal of SAS, who I happen to know a lot of years, and has always been very focused because she's one of the youngest principals around. And she has always been very focused, very level-headed for as long as I know, and I'm not surprised she's where she is today. I want to thank Miss Judy Milo, who I can always rely on, just like all of you. Miss Judy is very, very passionate about abuse and sexual abuse and all the forms of abuse, and she's very vocal about it. She's also directly involved in the lives of a lot of people who are experiencing this form of abuse. I want to also mention Senator Cadet, who had to leave because he had another important engagement. He is also very passionate about abuse and young people and very much engaged. He's a young man who really lives his life just focused on working as it relates to people. He's not very flamboyant and loud. He's a bit humble and calm, if you may say, but if you know him very much, as some of us have the opportunity, he's very passionate, and I respect that about him. I was not sure that I was going to be able to contain myself to speak after Miss Keisha McFarlane spoke, because I saw Brenda shedding some tears. So I felt some comfort knowing I was not the only one. But I really want to thank her for surmounting that strength and that courage that's necessary to be able to tell your story, because as Brenda was saying, somebody will benefit from the story, even if it's one person. I want to thank Reverend Bonnie James, who is always very enthusiastic about these social issues. And I was very pleased to have him, not just for the opening prayer, but because we always want to make sure we invoke the presence of God in everything we do. And I want to say thank you to the Reverend for highlighting issues in the church and, bringing the spiritual aspect to the table. We had Child Protection Authority who gave a wonderful presentation, because we know it's not easy for them. It's very difficult for them because they are directly involved, just like Miss Hillary, very much directly involved. And I spoke about the minister, but I also want to speak about Miss Elaine, who represented the Ministry of Social Development. I was very touched by her presentation. She's very, very passionate. You can tell the passion coming from what she says. You can tell that she's very knowledgeable, and I was very appreciative of having her here today. I know her face very well over the years, so she's very much, I've seen her on television a lot, I've heard her, so I know her well from that perspective. I don't want to forget the police, the Special Victims Unit, who played a very instrumental role in this afternoon's presentation, in bringing that law enforcement perspective to the table. And did I miss anybody? Yourself. I want to also special mention to my good friend, Dr. Pancho, who is not here today, but I know he's listening. And I would like to give him our warm regards and our prayers. He's not able to be with us at the moment, but I'm really appreciative for the support he has given us continuously. And, well, the media, thank you very much for Brenda from the media, Linda from the media. We have GIS, Leslie Ann, I'm very thankful. Sherry Ann, who is also from GBN, who's also very much interested in what's happening here. Nazim Benjamin, we have Mr. Richie Oliver, and we have the gentleman from GIS as well. So in case I missed anyone who played a role, I'm sorry, but you know that I mean well, and I'm very thankful. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you again, Rosemary. These things always come off seamless, but it's never easy to put together, as you need to cross a lot of I's, dot a lot of T's, and then come back and make a W and a V. So, and we know so many calls people have on their time these days. So it's great that you took your time, your resource, and that you collaborated with others to make this happen. Anything in service to my nation, count me in. I am there for it. Thank you so much, everyone who stayed on and viewed with us. A special thank you to our wonderful camera crew. Thank you very much. Carl and Leroy, thanks. Thanks to TNR Communications, the best in the business. Thank you so much, Richie Oliver and Nazim Benjamin. Wherever you were with us this afternoon, which has now turned into evening, we thank you very, very much. Until we do another one of these, I am Brenda Batiste. It's been a pleasure being with you. Good night.
This live stream was powered by Partygrenada.com.